Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. Today I've got Katie Ananina with me. Hi, Katie.
Hi there. Hi, Jake.
Welcome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I always start in the same way. So could you please give us a little introduction as to who you are and the projects you're involved in at the moment?
Absolutely. So I'm Katie. Most people know me by Katie the Russian. Based on that, you can probably understand that I was born and raised in Russia. I moved to the US about 6 years ago. In my childhood, teenage years, I was a professional athlete all the way until I was 21. I was on Russian national team doing a lot of sailing. On top of it, I've been doing some snowboarding while getting my degree in economics and finance. 2 years into school, I realized that the knowledge that I'm getting there is not applicable to the real world for the most part, and I realized that I'm just wasting my time. So I decided to drop out of school and move to the United States. And that's how I ended up here. What I'm doing now is I'm a founder and CEO of Plan B Passport, a consulting company where we help people obtain a second passport from jurisdictions that might be beneficial for them in different ways, such as lifestyle, tax regime, better jurisdictional environment for their businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And we believe that having multiple passports gives you more freedom. And you might know that from a country that's been under the lockdown for a couple of years, actually free now, I believe. So that's what I'm up to right now.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, the least so I'm from the UK originally, but my wife's Australian. We moved to Melbourne 31st of December 2019. So just before the pandemic kicked off.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been a real challenge. I mean, we became parents. My daughter was born in the bedroom just next to me right now. So we had a home birth during these lockdowns, which was planned, but it was still, I mean, yeah, wow. I'm Plan B Passport. I read about your website. I listened to you in a few podcasts. I mean, 100%. I've had a look into it, and it's funny how the problem that you have, like, it can change at any time. But when you have a problem with the country you're living in, there's actually, like, you suddenly don't have many options. Like, I felt very, very vulnerable sitting in my house in a city. Where's my water coming from? Where's my food coming from? I'm not allowed out the front door. Um, this isn't a conversation about me, but yeah, just to touch on Australian life, specifically Melbourne, has been an extraordinary roller coaster the last 24 months. And so the service that your business is providing is immensely valuable, and it's really a value proposition I only genuinely understood very recently.
Yeah.
We'll jump into that for sure. So I'd love to rewind and start back at the beginning. So what was life like in Russia growing up, and how did you get into sailing and snowboarding? Was that always a passion, or yeah, just teach me a bit about that period of your life.
So I was born in a really small town in a mountain city, but I believe this is one of the coolest cities to be born at because we have amazing lakes all around my hometown, as well as we're in the mountains. So during the winter time, I would snowboard a lot ever since I turned 9. My parents gave me a
Wow.
snowboard on my 9th birthday, and I spent at least 100 days on a ski resort, 100 days a year.
Wow.
So a lot of snowboarding. In my high school years, like my ski resort was 6 minute walk from my high school. So in a lot of times I would just skip my last 2 classes saying that, hey, I have a training scheduled with my coach. And I was on a state team, so that was easy. Like they would be like, oh, she's an athlete. She needs to go work on her, I don't know, slalom or something. So I would just skip my classes and go to ski resort. So that was fun. And through snowboarding, I ended up on sailing. The same coach who taught me how to snowboard was starting a class, a sail school, basically, a sailboat school, the same year. And I was like, okay, sure, I want to sail. I had no idea what sailing was. I literally, after the conversation with him, when he invited me to join the class, I came home and I opened the book with all the sports that are out there in the Olympics. And I was like, okay, what is sailing? Let me find how it looks. Is it like a surfboard with a sail, which was windsurfing? Is it an actual boat? Is it like kayaking? Because I had no idea what it is, but I was like, hell yeah, sign me up. Because I was doing so many things I always wanted to try new. Back then I was also like doing two different dance schools. I was in a musical school doing like piano and choir. So I would join any class you invited me for back then. So I was like, yeah, let's do sailing. And like just like in other hobbies, I got really into that, but that one got a little more successful and kind of hobby got out of hands. And I became a national champion at the age of like 12, I believe, 12. Yeah, and then I just started growing in junior classes, and then ended up being a champion throughout all female and male captains at the age of 17. So I started traveling around the world a lot for Europe Cups, World Cups, etc. And that's honestly how I moved to the United States. I was in top 20 world ranking at this point. I was 21, and I found out that I can get a green card here in the US for extraordinary abilities. Because I was a pro athlete, America wanted me to compete for them, and they gave me a green card.
Wow. It's funny how easy immigration is if the country wants you, um,
Yeah.
and how difficult it can be the other way around. So what I mean, what was that like then? I mean, you must have. I mean, to start sailing from scratch, it could be any sport, frankly. But did you just fall in love with it straight away? What was it about it that made you excited and want to? Because you must have spent a huge amount of time focusing on it, and there must have been some real
Yeah.
challenges as well. How did you feel about it? Like, why did you suddenly go, "Yeah, this is what I'm going to do"?
So I think what I like back then is a lot of responsibility. Like as a 9-year-old, you can't drive a car even if you want to. You can like you can't take responsibility for a lot of things because like your parents make decisions for you, or your teachers, etc. On a sailboat, like your life is in your hands. You can do whatever you want. It can be safe, it can be unsafe, but you're the captain of a single-handed boat, and you're like driving a thing, and that was pretty cool. Another point that I really liked about sailing, and I still do, it's a combination of like physical activity and a lot of like I don't know, brain activity, I guess. In Russia, we call sailing chess on the water because it's a lot of strategy involved, a lot of planning, and you have to think ahead, and then you have to analyze a lot. So I really like math growing up, and I felt like sailing and math are very related. So I don't know. I just got into that pretty quickly, and was getting better quite quickly. So maybe like once you get good at something, you want to get better and better, because
Mm.
like so quickly you became a champion of your city and then of your state, and like you want to keep going, and that was an extra motivation.
Wow, it's well, it's an incredible achievement. Top 20 in the world. Well done. I certainly didn't apply myself in the sporting world to that extent. And so when you ended up in the States, like how different was that in terms of the culture, in terms of the environment? Like, what were the kind of first impressions you had? And
That
obviously that's
was
where you now live, so presumably you preferred it, I guess. But yeah, was that a big shock when you suddenly started traveling internationally and seeing how different parts of the world worked?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. First of all, I moved by myself at the age of 21. Like right now, looking back, I'm like, was I crazy? Like, were my parents crazy? Like, how did that happen? How did they let me do that? How did I decide to go for it? I I had no savings. I had like $3,000 to move to the U.S., to the country where I've never been before.
Wow.
Like 8 months before moving, I did not speak a single word of English. So I was like, I'm just gonna learn the language in a matter of 6 months and I'll move. And I kind of did to an extent. So like 7 years ago, I did not speak English whatsoever, and I was like, okay, so where am I moving? And I kind of wanted to be in California because from Russia, California looks really good.
Mm, nice and
And
warm.
I wanted to be in San Francisco most likely. Like
Okay.
I was really into Stanford University. I thought it's a pretty good place to be. There's a lot of sailing there. There's a Silicon Valley culture, which I was into back then. But then I found a language school in Miami that was somewhat relatively cheap,
Hmm.
and I went to Miami, spent 8 months in the language school, and after that, I was just okay. Let's go through immigration now and try to get papers in order. And yeah, shortly after I got that done, even though that they did lose my green card for like over a year in the mail, and I was absolutely undocumented. Like I was legally in the country, I just couldn't prove it because they lost my
Wow.
papers, which is like funny. But yeah, that was fun. And that was honestly back then, I would say that I want to assign immigration to everybody because you do need to see like a lot of people are born with a perception that like we are the country and the rest of the world is foreign to me. But then you move and you acquire another culture and you realize that like both of those cultures are good in a way, and they both have their beauties and their faults. And like at this point you realize that every country has that, and you can make it work in any country, or you can hate things in every country as well. And it's an interesting perspective. Definitely a good lesson, I would say.
I mean, are you able to boil that down into like what were your favorite parts of life in Russia and what were your favorite parts of life in the States?
I really value the fact that I grew up in Russia. So
Okay.
I kind of like education system in Russia a little more. Like, for example, I did not have to attend school. Like attendance was not in the picture. Like I would go to school 4 months out of a year at best. My mom would always let me just sleep through if I didn't want to go to school, just because parents kind of have more freedom and power compared to school. Because here I know like you spend, I don't know, you skip 5 days in the middle school and they're like, give us a proof that was a reason, like that was a legitimate reason, and you can't just say that, hey, I was visiting my grandma. Like in Russia that totally works. Like
Mm.
I'm visiting grandma, not gonna be in school for a month, okay. um so that was cool. mm. I mean, obviously all my experiences growing up brought me where I'm at. Like I've
Mm.
seen so many hyperinflations. I've seen like national currency just going to shit in a matter of days. And it's like, huh, if only there was an asset that is like geopolitically
Neutral.
independent. Yeah, that would be amazing. So that was a really good experience. My cards being blocked all the time. Like I would be in a national team and I would travel to Spain. And at some point, my card just stopped working. They freeze my account for no reason. And I'm in Spain at the age of like 16 with no money. Great.
Wow.
And you're
Yeah.
like, if only there was a borderless asset where you have a radical control of it with just 12 words in your head, that would be nice. So that was a good experience. Now, like I miss a lot of things about Russia. Obviously, it's my home country. My parents still live there. I went there to visit in August. I do love the fact that we grow a lot of food there.
Mm.
Surprisingly, I'm from Siberia, which is like the coldest part of Russia.
Whoa.
But we still like we grew so much food. It's crazy. And now living in Texas, I'm like, why people don't do that here? Like everything is perfect for growing food here compared to Siberia.
You mean on like an individual family level, you guys used to grow your own food, and then obviously in the States, that's just not done.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like my parents were like good entrepreneurs. Like they grew their small businesses. They were happy. Like they were happy at their jobs, let's say, and they were pretty busy with that. But at the same time, we had like all the tomatoes, cucumbers, like pretty much all the vegetables and fruits we grew ourselves.
Wow.
And yeah, for the most part of the year. When we did good, it would last us all year. When we didn't do well, like we would have to buy it in
Mm.
spring and at the end of winter. But yeah, that was amazing, and it gave me a lot of good knowledge that I can still apply here in Texas. Hopefully, my radish has just sprouted, so I'm celebrating that.
um,
um,
sorry, what did you just say? I didn't understand. Sorry.
my radishes,
What is
like
that?
I just planted a bunch of radishes and they
Ah, right, right.
sprouted.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, cool. So you're growing your own food in Texas now.
I just started. Uh-huh.
Great. Yeah, my wife and I are very interested in this as well. It's, I mean, again, kind of going back to where I was at the start, talking about life in Melbourne in the lockdown. You know, we were in a 200 square meter property that we owned, but in a central urban area. Where's our food? I don't know. Like, it was illegal to leave your house. Like, it was just
Mm-hmm.
crazy. And it's very much left an impression on me. When in the future, I never want that to ever happen again, like ever. Um, yeah, wow. It's what's really refreshing about you explaining all of this is, we live in a time in which sadly Russia's been vilified in mainstream media, and it's wonderful to hear a story like yours where you enjoyed your life there. It's very simple. Your parents live there. Like, it's not it's not this like crazy horrible place to live that you turn on the TV and it's like, oh my god, like the enemy or the evil, the way it's kind of spread. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. That's really awesome. I feel like you have a comment to that. It's probably something you come up with or come across every day. And, oh, you're the Russian, and then they hassle you
Yeah.
about it. I don't know. I mean, does that happen?
I had like, I don't know, my brand, Katie the Russian, like there was no better brand to have in February 2022. So like this month, my brand just seriously hurt me in a way, but at the same time, I did not get less Russian. Like I did not become American or any other nation. I'm still Katie the Russian. I was born and raised there, and I I liked my experience. And I do not associate myself with politics by any mean. I hate all governments equally. So it's like, yeah, if we give them as much power, that's what's going to happen. But funny enough, you're saying how mainstream media paints Russia. My dad and I were just laughing yesterday that my grandpa, who never left Russia ever, who never flew on a plane whatsoever, who took a train last time like 40 years ago, is celebrating that oil is twice as expensive in the United States than it is in Russia. So that's what Russian mainstream media say. They're like, the life in the US is just terrible. Their gas prices are
Wow.
skyrocketing. They're twice as
Wow.
high as in Russia. And I'm like, yeah, our salaries are 10 times as high as in Russia. But
Yeah.
it's funny how my grandpa is like, oh, yeah, that's what's going on there in the
Wow. What
Western
an
world.
interesting story. Because of course it's being spun in favor of whoever wants to spin it, right? It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. Um, yeah. Okay. Cool. And thanks for sharing all of that, Katie. What I'd like to get into a bit more is this process of, okay, so you left Russia, you ended up in the States, and I have to say, I've heard you explain this before, but just for the sake of this particular conversation, you mentioned, I think you were talking about driving licenses, and you realized that you were in a different country and you could use a different driving license to that country, and the rules were perhaps more lenient, shall we say. Can you can you talk a bit about the genesis of Plan B passport? So you suddenly left Russia, you're traveling, your credit cards died in Spain, whatever might be the case. Like, what were the problems you came across as a Russian moving around the world?
Yeah. So, not even saying what's going on with Russian passports right now. Like, the
Yeah.
Russians are not welcome in probably 90% of the world, maybe 80. But even
Wow.
back then, I would have a legitimate reason for travel. Like I needed to go to Switzerland for European Championship. I needed to go to Spain, another for another Europe Cup, and I was denied in visas two of those times. And it's like I'm going there because I'm an athlete on a national team, and I still can get in because my passport is not powerful enough. And I constantly had visa issues back then being an athlete. Then when I applied for a US visa, I also got denied. So I had to go again and show them, look, I already paid for my language school. I already bought tickets. Can you just give me a visa so I can go there? And from a second try, they actually gave me a visa. So that kind of gave me perspective that different passports have different powers. And then moving to the US, going through immigration, I found this concept of jurisdictional arbitrage that you mentioned. So, like, it's much easier to explain in a way that um, you just have options, right? Like having multiple passports, having multiple residency permits or driver licenses or anything like that gives you options. And options mean choice, means that you are in control of a situation and you're not under control of your document. So that's what Plan B passport is about. We believe in this thing also called flag theory, and the idea behind the concept of flag theory is to limit your dependency on any one particular state while obtaining different documents from different countries. So you put your business in the best regulatory environment for the business. Then your taxes and your tax residency is in a tax haven where there's zero capital gains, zero income tax. But then you also like different lifestyles. So you spend sometimes in the winter, sometimes in the summer in Latin America or elsewhere. And you just shop for jurisdictions, just like, in the free market, you shop for produce, you buy veggies from one lady who grows it, then you go to the butcher to buy meat, then you go for dairy elsewhere, right? Like you're shopping for the best you can get. And the same way you shopping for the best you can get from the world of nation states. You see what they have to offer and you collect those flags.
It's a fascinating concept. Some of the initial kind of kickback from people will be this very like collective or community driven kind of guilt trip that often tax-paying members of society are in, when it's like, what, so you can just live in a different place and not pay tax? Like you're cheating the system, or the people least wealthy in society will disbenefit because you're not, paying in. What do you say to that kind of criticism? If it even ever comes up? I know that I've in the past voiced this kind of opinion where I'm unhappy with what my tax is being used for. I have no idea where it goes. I feel like I'm paying too much and there's no accountability whatsoever for what happens. And on top of that, you then lock me in my house for like a year. Like, fuck you. I'm not happy about this. But then equally, you're supposed to just pay your tax. Like we weren't allowed to use the roads, but your road tax bill still comes through. Like stupid stuff like that. But then
Yeah.
as soon as you go and say, oh, well, I'm going to go and live somewhere with zero tax, people go, oh, you can't do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that kind of that social stigma, does that come up at all in this conversation?
I would say it used to. Right now, I'm in a kind of a bubble where where we all think the same. But whenever it comes up, I say, well, duh, that's what capitalism is. You have money, you decide to go elsewhere, you can pay for it, or you choosing the best service provider, aka government, was the best price for the best value, and that's what's happening. Like when you apply simple capitalist rules into nation state, that's where you end up. But not only that, if we did not have those monopolies, like they basically have monopoly on you. Being born in a country with one passport means they have monopoly over you. But then if you apply those capitalist structures onto nation states, they will realize at some point that now they have to compete between each other, just like businesses in a free market. They will have to provide better services, provide you with better price, because they know that they can lose you easily. You will go elsewhere with your wealth, with fruits of your labor, with your brain, etc. And we do see it now with talent moving from one country to another and countries competing for talent. But the same way, they need to compete for your wealth, because they can't just print money forever. There will be an asset that is verifiably. I don't know. Now I need to go into sailor's mode where he just
But it's
saying
actually
adjectives, and
no,
metaphors.
it's a good segue though, because I have lots of questions, but let's go in this direction. So we haven't really explicitly talked about our love of Bitcoin during this conversation so far. We're about, let's say 25, 30 minutes in. At some point during this journey, you came across it. Perhaps you can talk about when you first found out about it, and we'll then go on to like how it's an integral part of the play that is what you're describing, the Plan B passport. And then I can come back to some of the other questions I have around that. So yeah, just a little bit more about your actual Bitcoin experience.
It's so interesting how even like a year or two ago, I would remember my way entering Bitcoin space because that was such a big event in my life. But at this point, Bitcoin is like engraved into my life and feels like it's been there forever. And I can only look into like what other rabbit holes Bitcoin opened to me, because like I live in the Bitcoin world, and
Yeah.
thanks to Bitcoin, I found other things. But going back there, so I'm Katie, an immigrant in Miami who barely speaks English, who started learning English like a year before this point. And I'm getting a Facebook message from a friend that I recently met in a language school who happened to be a producer in a Russian TV channel. She said, Katie, there's this Bitcoin like Bitcoin crypto mining fund, whatever, from Russia that is going for a conference in Miami, and they need a translator who will help them interview speakers at the event. And
Wow.
I'm like, at this point, I was already like trying to learn about Bitcoin, going to local meetups, just posted something on Facebook, had no capital to invest into that, but just like was somewhat fascinated by the concept of freedom behind it as much as I understood it at this point. So I was like, hell yeah, I'm gonna do that. So they, pay for my flight, pay me a tiny bit, like nothing basically, but I fly there, go to this conference. It's a totally shitcoin conference, like as shitcoin as it gets. But somehow I find super weird guy at this event, and I'm like, dude, like, where do I actually learn? And magically, he recommends me Mastering Bitcoin by Antonopoulos, which, we like to hate Antonopoulos, but he was a huge influence for many of us. Basically, the whole school of like 2015, 2017 came through him. So this book like somewhat opened my eyes on a few things. And at this point, like I barely speak English. There were two teachers in school that would tell me that I will never be good at their subject. That was IT. We actually had a class named IT. And the other one was English. And guess what? I know their subject better than they do now. Those bitches.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah. So yeah, in English I started reading this Mastering Bitcoin book. I started going down the rabbit hole. Pretty soon later, luckily I did not have much capital to invest in shitcoins, and I was too afraid to make any shitcoin moves because I just didn't want to move anything. So it kind of saved me from a shitcoin journey, because by the time I was confident in my transactions, I was like, no, I'm gonna stay with Bitcoin. So that was good. And yeah, and just like that, I started going deeper and deeper into rabbit holes. At the same time, I found the concept of flag theory. At first, I was helping another financial migration company because they needed a Bitcoin expert to help them accept payments, and I just was talking to them about Bitcoin. But soon after, I was like, okay, I'm just going to start my financial investment migration company, and that's what Friendly Passport is.
Wow, it's amazing. See, this is what I love about these conversations: is is drawing all the dots. There's different moments in your life where different things happen, and those moments blended together bring literally what brings us to the table today. And I hope through these conversations in this podcast, it will become so evident over time that all of these different individuals that have hugely different skill sets and therefore different lens on life have all congregated at the same point. Like, that is fascinating. Why is that? And you've already mentioned lots of reasons why, the different problems you'd faced. To talk a little bit about like life in Melbourne here. So I'm a British passport holder, but my wife is an Aussie citizen. We just had a child. For Lauren to have left Australia during these lockdown rules as an unvaccinated person, she had to apply for a special exemption to get out of the country. That's only just been dropped very recently, like yesterday, basically.
Yeah.
So unless you were going for over 3 months, you couldn't physically leave the country. And it's like, what the fuck? Are you serious? And so that very much like instigated an investigation, and that's how I came across your business, Plan B Passport. Could you talk a little bit about what it means to you? So we're a family of 3, about to be 4. I followed you for a while on Twitter, so I believe you've recently become a parent as well. So congratulations. We love the concept of taking on separate passports in order to give ourselves more options, as you describe. But we have a young family, and we like the hospital system here in Australia. We have friends and family here or in the UK. How do you get around that? Do you have to be willing to move your young family, every 4 months or whatever, to different jurisdictions and travel around the world? I can see the huge allure and benefits of taking on this kind of flag theory process, but it's made tricky when you have a small family. So how do you navigate that process yourself? And what do you
Always
send?
priorities, right?
Okay.
Priorities is how you navigate everything in life. But let's start a little back. Like, different people have different goals and needs when they obtain a second passport. For some people, it's a tax regime, right? So they want to make sure they don't pay capital gains tax on their Bitcoin. So that would be one reason. Second reason would be they just so disagree politically with their home country that they have nothing, they don't want to have anything to do with their home country. They want to leave. Yeah, a lot of Russian citizens doing it now. A lot of Americans actually doing it now, due to, political opinion that doesn't match the country's politics. But for a lot of people, it's just a plan B. So for the moment when shit hits the fan, like, you want to be able to get out. So in a situation with Australia, if you did have a second passport, that would be much easier for you, which you did. So you would be able to leave Australia. Now, let's look into what's going on with Russia right now. They're basically ostracized by all the bankings of the world. They can't travel unless they have a second passport. So those Russians who, let's say, have like St. Kitts passport, they're still in the banking of the world. They can still do like international trades. Their business can still survive. They can still travel very freely on their second passport, even though they are Russian citizens, but they're dual citizens. So while traveling, they're just using their St. Kitts passport, let's say. So situations like that is when Plan B passport becomes Plan A passport. Mm-hmm. And again, in the moment, like, I really like to say that a lot because that applies to Bitcoiners and sovereign living a lot. Like, there's a moment of crisis, right? In the moment of crisis, you can't think, you can't think normally. You're unable to think clearly. You're basically, I'll have to find the definition of crisis for mental health, because I really like.
I know what you mean, though. It's this concept of like risk on the bell curve, right? So most stuff will happen in an area that's like not too bad, but sometimes you're going to have, for example, I had James Lavish on this show, and he talks about basically the all-out collapse of fiat currencies is like a hugely improbable but extremely dangerous event if it does happen, and therefore buying Bitcoin as an insurance policy against that particular, like, outrageously unlikely but very damaging moment is important. And I think what you're trying to describe here is the same thing. So your Plan B passport, you actually might not need it for the vast majority of your life, but the moment that you do, it's unbelievably valuable. And I imagine you've had a lot of incoming business from friends and family, perhaps, or contacts back in Russia in the last few months. Yeah, wow.
Interestingly enough,
I think I get your point.
The Russian people cannot get their Plan B passport anymore.
They
so
can't.
All those countries who used to offer citizenship by investment have dropped Russia as a potential applicant. They do not accept applications anymore. And that's another thing why like now is the time, because you don't know what your country is going to pull off, and other countries will drop you. Like Canadian citizens, like, their country is going a little crazy and the world starts realizing it. So perhaps Caribbean islands at some point might drop Canada as their potential applicant because they disagree with what the country does and they want to push them in a certain direction. So you can get, like, Russian citizens Plan B passport is working if they got it before the crisis started.
Interesting. Okay.
Now they can't get it anymore.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to keep in mind then, is that this extremely unlikely but very damaging moment might not even allow you to get a Plan B passport because of the rule changes that happen. Wow. Yeah, that's definitely something to consider, isn't it? And so in our case, perhaps then, just to briefly just highlight myself and the use case here, as a young family, you wouldn't go through this process necessarily from a tax perspective or because you disagree with the government, but it's just to, like, this is the backup option if we need it.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the stance that you guys as a young family have taken as well, is it?
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. It's well worth it. It's something I'm going to have to look into for sure. So to talk a little bit.
Let me actually do this crisis. I finally found it in my notes.
Oh, go on.
So a crisis is any situation in which person's action, feelings, and behaviors can lead them to hurting themselves or others, or put them at risk of being unable to care for themselves or function effectively. And I really like this definition of crisis. It's from mental health again.
Yeah.
From mental health world. but it's so applicable for, sovereign individual thesis, because that's why we do the prepping, because instead of crisis, we have a system in place for when shit hits the fan. So for people who are unprepped, let's say tiny crisis such as, power outage comes, right? Let's say that. Are you prepared for that? Yes or no? Or let's say some disaster, like natural disaster, let's say hurricane comes, you can't go to a supermarket. All you have to do is anchor down and stay at home, right? Do you have enough like meat, rice, lights, and all that stuff for 2 weeks to spend at home without leaving the house? If the answer is no, your crisis is very likely to happen. Like not being able to spend 2 weeks at home without leaving the house, without having all the provisions for that, like that's pretty bad. So again, instead of having a potential crisis, we're building a system in place. So when the crisis comes, it's no longer a crisis for you because you're prepared. And that's about Bitcoin. Like most of the Western world people have never seen inflation. Like that's not something that they expected whatsoever. On top of it, their bank accounts never been frozen. Their money or safe for their whole life, for their parents' whole life, for their grandparents' whole life. So they did not see Bitcoin being as valuable as they do now. And why now? Because inflation is hitting crazy numbers here in the US. Because they see how, like, even some Russian citizens who haven't been in Russia for 50 years, even their accounts, like bank accounts and properties, are being seized. And it's like, how far are we from that? And like
Or
we've seen the
you
same
could have
happening.
donated to the Canadian Freedom Truckers convoy, and you've had your bank account frozen.
Exactly.
It's
Like
fucking
who are the
crazy.
judges to call you a criminal, right?
Yeah.
So that's and that's the crisis that Bitcoin solves. If you have
Yeah.
Bitcoin, this crisis is no longer a crisis, but a system for you. And the same is applicable for everything. Like that's why we have guns,
Yeah.
not in Australia, but
No.
that's why we're so big on Second Amendment and things like that. That's why we grow food in the backyard, because again, we want to be prepared for food shortages just in case. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting. And so, could we just flesh out a little bit like the role that Bitcoin plays in this thesis then? So, traditionally, you would own most of your wealth perhaps in your house, so the property that you live in, or you might run a physical business, a cafe, a factory. The ability to move your wealth was like pretty impaired, basically. So I use this example, it's just sprung to mind. Syria, pre the the Arab Spring crisis that arrived, was a actually fairly wealthy country, and suddenly they had to basically become refugees and leave, and ended up moving to Europe or wherever they moved to, and they left behind like a lot of like perfectly good businesses that they just couldn't take with them. And had they had a second passport, that would have been helpful in terms of migration, but they'd still have to leave everything behind. The same would apply for basically the majority of people. We hold our wealth in physical assets. What does Bitcoin mean in this context?
Being able to flee with all your wealth, just as long as you can remember 12 words, basically. Like, again, going back to Russia, I do know a lot of Russian entrepreneurs living in the US with their businesses in Russia. Those are digital businesses accepting money in Russian rubles and Russian banks. This whole time they were able to use their Russian cards in the US, paying for their life, etc., no problem. Now it's no longer the case. I was able to orange peel so many of those people, not because they got it, but because they had to get, like,
Yeah,
there was
wow.
absolutely no other option. They could not move money on any other way other than buying Bitcoin with their Russian card in Russia, moving Bitcoin to their non-custodial wallet, and now they're free.
Wow.
So that was huge, and that was a big eye-opening experience for all those Russians. Now, even more interestingly, a lot of Russian immigrants here in the US support their families in Russia. So those, elderly women who were having help from their son here in the US can no longer get money. The only way for him to send money would be Bitcoin. and they all got orange pilled just because of the necessity of it.
Wow. And that to me is like a critical part of all this, where the use case for Bitcoin is growing every day. So, we're too obsessed with the price. The longer you're involved in the space, the price becomes less relevant in a sense. But the process of understanding how much more important it's becoming to everyone is like, that's the real like noise, like canceling bit. That's the signal within the noise. Well, that's the description I was thinking of. The fact is, they don't need to care how Bitcoin works. Like, they don't need to read Mastering Bitcoin. They don't need to go to some events and think, oh, this is quite interesting. Why does this work for me? They're like, I can't get any money to my mum. How the fuck am I going to do it? Oh, here's Bitcoin. And you go, whoa, okay, this is powerful. Which, presumably over time, as governments become more and more kind of addicted to the money printer, more and more reactive rather than being able to plan properly, these use cases will grow.
It's so true. I was recently thinking how it used to be so hard for me to explain Bitcoin. I would be like, okay, so there's this thing called blockchain, and there's this
Yeah.
difficulty adjustment, and this is a bunch of computers mining Bitcoin, and they're like, what?
Yeah.
And now, like, my midwives came over to learn about Bitcoin, and it took
Wow.
me like 4 minutes to just, this is inflation, this is how we do that, this is censorship, this is radical ownership, this is why Bitcoin is good. And they got it right away. So
Wow.
all my midwives are now orange pilled.
Fantastic. Well, maybe some Bitcoiners from birth will be resulted in as out of that. Yeah.
It's honestly incredible how easy orange pillable home birth industry is, because they've seen how medical system is fucked up,
Yeah.
and they're being suppressed by medical system, and they don't trust them anymore. They're trying to do more freedom stuff, but their hands are tied. And when you explain them Bitcoin, they're like, yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, I got it.
So, did you have a home birth then, Katie?
No, I was robbed of my home birth experience. I'm so angry. And so my baby actually came early
Okay.
for absolutely no reason, and we had to go into the hospital. But we were still able to do a fully natural unmedicated birth and
Wonderful.
avoid any intervention. Yeah, that's the right
Intervention. Yeah.
word. Yeah, but I really wanted this home birth experience. Like, I was all set on it. It just didn't happen.
Well,
It's okay.
maybe next time
Oh,
around.
yeah, I'll have more opportunities.
And so, you mentioned you're in Texas. Can you tell me a bit about life in Texas today? And I, as a Bitcoiner based in Australia, read a lot about Austin and how it's the Bitcoin capital of the world. How does it feel? I don't know exactly where you are in Texas. Don't know if you necessarily want to say, but what's life like there, and particularly as a
So I'm
Bitcoin?
in Austin, the
You are. Okay,
capital of
cool.
Bitcoin world. I absolutely love it. Americans call it blueberry and tomato soup because it's very like democratic city in a very red Republican state.
Yeah, cool.
But for me, it just means that there's a mix of people and somehow they all get along, meaning that they don't take politics over family values or like over personal relationships. So they don't see people as blue or red, they just see people, which
Hmm.
is like me as a political or anti-political, I guess, person. Um, that works for me. I can just be myself and say that I hate both parties equally, and they're totally cool with that too. um yeah, and what I think, I don't know, I really love the city. Like, I moved here a little less than a year ago. I fall in love with the city. I love the nature. I love the climate. I like the people and the things that I can do here. A lot of activities, like basically anything I can come up with, I can find it. Like, paddleboarding, kayaking,
Mm.
CrossFit, things like that, on a really good level. I also do love local farmers. Like, Texas is really big on local food sourcing.
Hmm.
So I go to the farmer market every week or maybe twice a week. There's my favorite one on Sunday, where it's like you walk into this farmer market and you feel like you're at a Bitcoin meetup, because you're like, oh, I know you, I know you, I know you. And then at the end of farmer market, we just all end up at this kind of
And are
like
you guys
meetup
are
spot.
you guys buying food with your Bitcoin?
There are a lot of places that accept Bitcoin. Like there's this beef initiative going on, led by Texas Slim,
Yep.
and he's basically onboarding all the farmers to start accepting Bitcoin for beef.
Wow.
And that's pretty cool initiative. They actually have a conference this weekend where it's like all the farmers and Bitcoiners get together and talk about beef
Wow.
and money. Yeah,
Interesting.
pretty cool. So I absolutely love Austin and Texas. Again, I'm very flexible with where I live. Like I've been nonstop traveling for 4 years, living everywhere I could find. Like I spent over a year in Mexico before moving here, which I also loved a lot. So I'm flexible in a way that if I have to, I will move elsewhere and I'll find happiness in I'll build perfect lifestyle for myself and my family if necessary. But at the same time, I do like to be somewhat settled down in
Mm.
building around the place where I'm at.
Well, and especially as a recent as a recent mum, like there's that kind of well, certainly my wife and I have felt this that I don't know, it's like a natural instinct to kind of nest, isn't it? You want to stay in the same place and just make sure everyone's safe. And like, I'm sure as maybe we get older and have other kids and they get a bit older, like actually actively traveling between, for example, I've thought about having a second passport, getting an Aussie passport, so I'd have three, and you'd spend some time in the UK, some time in Australia, but not too much time that you end up getting snared by the income tax rules and CGT rules. And then, I don't know, having a Caribbean passport of some form and going to Mexico. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but your kids need to be at a certain age, I think, to make that straightforward.
Yep.
And that will happen at some stage. I was also going to say I've got a friend here who's going to be helping Bitcoiners buy beef directly from an Aussie farmer. So the Australians, I think 60% of the food that they produce is exported. So there's an amazing amount of fresh food and produce being created here. So building those networks where there's urban-based Bitcoiners that want to buy directly from someone who they know who's done the farming, buy a whole cow, stick it in the freezer. Like that's also growing here as well. So it's a really interesting trend where it's come out of need in a sense. Like, where's my food coming from? I've been lulled into this false sense of kind of urban life where I can outsource everything, and then suddenly you
Yep.
can't, and then your crisis arrives, and I guess it's how you
It's very
react to
true.
crises that makes such a difference.
And also, don't trust, verify, right? One thing that Texas Slim asked, well, we just hosted a conference in Miami and he was a speaker there. And
Yeah.
one thing that he asked is like, how many hands does your food goes through between being completed as a food and you? And you're like, I have no idea what the routing is like
Yeah.
in this whole
Wow.
transaction.
Yeah. So what's
No
the
clue.
complexity of the supply chain? Yeah.
Yeah, and then you look into like your farmer market, you know them by name. It's just like peer to peer, node to node. Like be your own node and grow
Mm,
your own food, or at least know from which node you can purchase
mm.
verifiable food. And it's like, yeah.
It's amazing. The ability to communicate internationally is obviously relatively recently become free. So this conversation, we've been able to get in touch, not had a call like this before, and get to know each other a bit better, and obviously brilliantly hear your story. But there's similar characteristics to the life you're trying to build yourself that I'm also interested in, and we're in completely different parts of the world. So it's very interesting to see over time how people might well be influenced by these, like, take a plan B passport, for example, or equally like find out about your food chain. And these type of mentalities are obviously seeping into societies all over the world. We just, we know about a very small microcosm of it.
Yes.
I wonder how, that will change the world going forwards. I don't know.
No, I'm very much into merging all this rabbit holes together. Like
Mm,
recently, Jessica and I and Afkar, Saifuddin's wife, recorded an episode on home birth,
cool.
and that's a huge rabbit hole that some Bitcoiners got into, while others knew nothing about it. But it's like in terms of values, it's so aligned between Bitcoin and
Yeah, isn't
home
it?
birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you're merging this two, Bitcoiners click like this on stuff like
Yeah.
home birth because they don't trust government, they don't trust medical system. They always come back to first principles, and they do want to see things that been around for, you know, centuries, and that's naturally comes to home birth. And then again, you look into other things like off-grid housing, where you try to build self-sufficient house that is, you know, surviving on like local water, solar energy or something like that. And you're like, yeah, it makes sense because I want to be off-grid. I don't want to rely on the local government either. And like, I'm really into all these little rabbit holes that make you a little more sovereign.
I can
And that's
tell.
why
Yeah.
I've been hosting
Well, the passion
underground
comes through. It's
citadels.
great.
Yeah. And like another huge thing that's definitely gonna be my next project after Plan B Passport. Not that I will never leave Plan B Passport, but at some point I'll be off operations and I'll move into unschooling again, because like
Whoa.
we're outsourcing the school system to people who did not do well in school by themselves, and they don't really like their jobs, and they do like work under government entities, therefore their hands are forced to do whatever they're told, so they can't, like, the interests don't align in a lot of cases. And when you realize like that your kids are sitting on the desk for 8 hours a day with a bad posture, learning things that they will never need in life, on top of it being brainwashed current thing, the politics, whatever, and you're like, that's not what I want to do. So how do I get out of it? And that's huge interest of mine.
It actually, it's interesting that we've come full circle. But at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned about the difference between Russian and American school life, and how actually Russian school life was a lot more relaxed. You didn't have to kind of tell the school where you were. You just, you know, you got on with whatever your family chose to do. And I didn't comment on it at the time, but it's also a rabbit hole I've started going down. Like, I've now got a child. Like, how am I going to teach them about the world? And the kind of the student-led philosophy seems so
Yeah,
interesting,
child-led education.
right? And this whole idea that now you can utilize digital platforms, you can sit anywhere in the world, you can have one of the best teachers in that specific niche give a class to people in like 17 different countries at the same time, and you know, they can do like 1 or 2 focus hours per day of school and become absolutely expert in something that they truly love by the age of like 15, rather than do all the other bullshit that we had to sit through. And this whole process of I have a YouTube channel with some mates, and we did an interview with Daniel Prince. I don't know if you've ever spoken with Daniel,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
his story is great. And he's like, school teaches obedience, doesn't teach discipline. You know, you have to wear
exactly.
the same fucking set of clothes as everyone. You get chucked in a classroom, you have to be totally silent for like half the day and listen to some mole at the front tell you about how life works, and they're all just regurgitating the same thing as everyone else has been told to say. Like, there's no, or at least his view of that's what school was. I think you're right. Like, it's fascinating. So if we can, you know, get our food from somewhere close by, if our wealth can be stored somewhere that no one can actually touch, and we can physically move it without any cost whatsoever, and we're able to then teach our kids on the fly, this changes everything, doesn't it? Like, in
Yep.
terms of how our parents would have thought about, you know, life. It's opened up like 100 million more rabbit holes, and I'm sure we could go on for another hour or so. Katie, thanks so much for sharing your journey with me, and teaching me about all the things that you're working on, and how life's been so far. You made one comment that's really resonated with me, which is around the opportunity to go to that Bitcoin conference. When you first started learning about Bitcoin, you said, hell yeah, I'm going to do that. That philosophy seems to permeate everything you've done since you've been, you know, back as a teenager, getting involved in sport, and then diving into being an entrepreneur and being a Bitcoiner. So what an awesome story. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I wish you the very best of luck as a parent and with Plan B Passport. If there's anything I can do to help, then do let me know. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed our time.
And as a last comment, where can people get hold of you if they wanted to?
Well, Katie the Russian on Twitter, as well as Katie at planbpassport.com. You can always schedule a free consultancy for passport talks, flag theory, strategizing, and brainstorming on what's best for you. My DMs on Twitter are pretty open. I somewhat try to stay on top of it. Sometimes fail, but not too bad. And yeah, that should be good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Bye.